I want to take you back to a moment that feels almost impossible to imagine today, given the tech landscape we all live in.
Right.
The date is June 7th, 2000. We're in the District of Columbia. The world's media is just camped outside this courthouse, and inside, a gavel comes down.
A huge moment.
And a federal judge issues a ruling that threatens to take the most valuable company on the entire planet and, physically rip it in half.
It really was a seismic moment. I think people forget the sheer scale of this. The court didn't just fine them or, slap them with sanctions. They ordered that Microsoft, the absolute empire that Bill Gates built from nothing, be broken up.
Into two separate companies.
Exactly. Two separate entities. One company to handle the operating system, so Windows, and a completely separate company to handle everything else, all the applications like Office and, crucially, Internet Explorer.
Yeah, this wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was the corporate equivalent of the death penalty. We are talking about the biggest corporate dismantlement order in the United States since, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil?
Way back in 1911. That's the scale we're talking about. The government was looking at Bill Gates, who was the poster child of American ingenuity and success, and effectively saying, you are too powerful.
You've gone too far.
You have abused your monopoly, and the game is over.
It's just staggering. At that exact moment, Bill Gates was the face of the digital revolution. He was the richest man in the world by a long shot. But in the eyes of the Department of Justice, he wasn't this tech hero.
No, not at all. He was a ruthless tycoon who would crush anyone, and I mean anyone, competitors, partners, even the government who got in his way.
But here is the massive irony, and this is really the hook for our deep dive today. That breakup.
It never happened.
It never happened. The decision was overturned on appeal. Microsoft stayed whole. So on paper, they won the war. But looking back now, they kind of lost the peace, didn't they?
That is the truly fascinating part of the story. They fought the government to a standstill, spending just immense amounts of capital and energy and, brain power on this legal battle. But while Gates was sitting in those depositions and his top executives were battling lawyers, two little companies, one called Google, one called Apple, were quietly building the future that would eventually just completely eclipse Microsoft's dominance.
It's like they won the battle but lost the next decade. So today we are doing a deep dive into the man at the absolute center of this storm. We've got a stack of sources here, including a transcript from a really comprehensive documentary on his life, and what I find fascinating, some really specific details from his 2025 memoir, Source Code.
Yeah, that memoir gives us a lot of insight of thinking.
And so our mission today is to try and answer this massive question. How do you go from being a Harvard dropout to a guy so powerful, so dominant that the United States government literally tries to destroy your company?
And maybe the even more interesting question, how do you then go from being that ruthless monopolist, the villain of the entire tech world, to becoming arguably the most significant philanthropist in all of human history?
The man trying to save the world from malaria and polio and climate change.
It's a paradox.
It is the Bill Gates paradox. And I have to say, going through these sources, the details are not what I expected at all. We think of him as this sort of standard issue nerd, right? Glasses, sweaters, that slightly awkward smile.
Sure, that's the public.
But the specific weird details of his childhood are just wild. It's not simply that he liked computers. It goes so much deeper and stranger than that.
It really does. And I think if we want to understand the tycoon or if we want to understand the philanthropist, we have to start with the problem child. Because before he was a billionaire, he was a kid his own parents didn't know.
Okay, let's unpack that. Part one, the origin story. So 1955, Seattle, Bill Gates is born. And on paper, this looks like a pretty privileged setup, doesn't it? This is not a rags to riches story in the traditional sense.
Oh, no, not at all. He was born William Henry Gates III. His father, Bill Gates Sr., was this towering figure. Literally, he was very tall, but also figured. He was an Army veteran who came back from World War II and went on to build a very, very successful law practice in Seattle.
And his mother.
His mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, came from a wealthy family of bankers. She was incredibly active, a regent at the University of Washington, and just deeply, deeply connected in civic and corporate circles.
So we're talking about high expectations from day one. This was not a household where the attitude was, do whatever makes you happy, son.
Extremely high expectations. The sources describe the dinner table dynamic as very intense. Even when Bill and his sister Christy were young, the parents would discuss their work, their civic responsibilities, global affairs.
Wow.
It wasn't just, how was school today and eat your peas. It was a constant education in how the world's power structures work. The expectation was that you would participate in these discussions, you would be informed, and you would be prepared to contribute to society in a significant way.
But young Bill wasn't exactly falling in line, was he? The source material describes him as restless and a disciplinary issue, which is just funny to imagine. What was he actually doing that was so bad?
He was bored. That is the absolute key driver here. He was a voracious reader. I mean, the story goes he read the entire World Book Encyclopedia from A to Z, but he found the day-to-day lessons in school painfully uninteresting.
So he acted out.
He acted out. He would interrupt class with these sarcastic comments. He was constantly defying his parents, especially his mother. They'd get into these long, drawn-out arguments, it seems, so he could prove that he could win the debate through pure logic. It was a battle of wills.
And it got so bad that his parents actually sent him to a therapist. That seems like a pretty drastic step for the 1960s, doesn't it?
It was a huge step. They sent him to a psychiatrist, Dr. Charles Cressy, and this wasn't just, a couple of sessions to sort things out. Gates saw him for 2
years.
2 years. The parents were genuinely worried about his behavior, his withdrawal into his room, his absolute refusal to follow the program they'd laid out for him. They thought something was seriously wrong with him.
And this is where we get the first real aha moment in his story. And it's not a computer that saves him, not initially. It's a librarian.
Yes, exactly. A teacher named Mrs. Carlson had this insight. She realized he didn't need more discipline. He needed more intellectual stimulation. She saw that all his bad behavior was really just a surplus of processing power with nowhere to go.
Like a CPU overheating.
A perfect analogy. So she handed him off to the school librarian, a woman named Blanche Keffier.
I just love this detail. It feels so wonderfully analog for a guy who would become the ultimate digital pioneer. So what did she do with him? What did she teach him?
She taught him the Dewey Decimal System.
You're kidding. The book classification system, the numbers on the spines of the library books.
The very same. And Bill Gates, this supposed problem child, absolutely loved it. He didn't just learn it, he became obsessed with it. He actually worked as her assistant during his lunch breaks, organizing the book, putting them back in their exact right place.
Okay, I have to pause here because this is fascinating. Why? What is the appeal of the Dewey Decimal System to a young Bill Gates? I mean, most kids, myself included, would find that incredibly tedious.
Well, think about what the Dewey Decimal System actually is. It's pure logical order. It's a framework for organizing all of the world's information into a coherent structure.
A database.
It's a database for physical objects. It breaks all of human knowledge down into 10 main classes, then into divisions, then into sections. It appealed to his rational mind in a way that, say, English literature didn't.
So he wasn't looking for stories. He was looking for the architecture behind the stories.
Exactly. Even at that young age, he was searching for systems, for structures where everything had a logical place and nothing was chaotic or ambiguous. It completely foreshadows the kind of mind that wants to build an operating system for the entire world. He wanted to impose order on chaos.
That makes a ton of sense. And speaking of this obsessive behavior, we absolutely have to talk about the Delaware.
Oh, this is a classic Gates anecdote, a defining story. In 5th grade, shortly after he moved to a new elementary school, he decided for a class project to write a report on the state of Delaware.
Okay, a 5th grade report. I'm picturing, 3 or 4 pages, maybe some pictures cut out from a magazine and glued on, big handwriting to fill the space.
Like try 177 pages.
Wait, hold on. 177 on Delaware. No offense to Delaware.
On the small business-friendly state of Delaware, yes. He basically wrote a book. He did this incredibly extensive research in the library. He went down the rabbit hole on everything. Corporate tax laws, state history, demographics, geography.
Why?
Just because he could. It shows this incredible capacity for deep work and frankly for that would define his entire career. He didn't just want to complete the assignment. He wanted to master the subject completely. He wanted to know more about Delaware than the teacher did, more than anyone in the school did.
That is actually terrifying behavior for a 10-year-old. It's wildly impressive, but also, a little terrifying.
It's an intensity that is not normal.
And he did try to be normal, right? The sources mention his mom really pushed him into sports and music.
Oh, she tried very hard. It was part of that well-rounded civic leader mold she had for him. He played various instruments. He tried tennis, swim team.
But he quit.
He abandoned all of them. And the reason why is so telling. He quit because he wasn't immediately the master of them. He quickly realized he probably wasn't going to be the best swimmer in the world, so why bother? He wanted to focus his energy only on the things where he believed he could.
Which brings us perfectly to part 2, the Lakeside Hacker. This is where the superhero, or depending on your view, the supervillain origin story really kicks into high gear.
Right. So it's 1967. His parents decide the public schools just can't handle him, so they spend the money to send him to Lakeside School. It's a very prestigious private school for the Seattle, and this is where luck, pure dumb luck, plays a huge
Rummage sale.
The rummage sale. The Lakeside Mothers Club holds a rummage sale, and raises about $3,000. They have a meeting to decide what to do with the money, and someone suggests buying something almost no other high school in America had at the time: computer.
Now, we really need to clarify for you what computer time meant in 1968. This wasn't a room full of shiny laptops.
Oh, absolutely not. There was no screen, there was no mouse, there was no graphical interface. It was a teletype machine, specifically an ASR 33 model.
So paint a picture for us. What is that?
Imagine a giant, incredibly loud mechanical typewriter. You'd type a command onto a roll of paper. That command would travel through a phone line. You'd literally hear it dialing up to a mainframe computer miles away. In this case, it was usually a PDP-10 owned by General Electric.
And then?
Then the computer in some far-off building processes it, sends the answer back down the phone line, and the typewriter in front of you starts typing out the answer all by itself. Clack, 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 clack.
And for Gates, this was it. This was the drug.
It was instant feedback. It was purely rational. If your code is correct, it works. If your code is wrong, it fails. There's no ambiguity, no messy human emotions, no parents telling you to clean your room. It was a world of pure logic, and he fell completely in love with it.
And he finds his tribe here, right? C-cubed group.
Right. This is where he meets his crew. It was Bill Gates, Paul Allen, who was 2 years older than him and already knew a bit about electronics, a guy named Rick Weiland, and Kent Evans. They eventually called themselves the Lakeside Programming Group, but in the early days, they were just these kids hanging out at a place called the Computer Center Corp, or C.
And the deal they struck with this company sounds like something straight out of a movie. We will find the bugs in your system if you let us use the computer for free.
It was a barter system born of pure necessity. You have to understand, computer time was incredibly expensive back then. We're talking something like $40 an hour.
Which in today's money is?
Hundreds of dollars. An insane amount of money. These high school kids could never afford that. So when C-cubed opened up, they went to them with this proposition. Let us use your machine after hours, and we'll be your beta testers. We will document all the bugs in your system software for you.
And it became an obsession. The source mentions Bill literally sneaking out of his house at night.
Yes. This is how dedicated. He would wait until his parents were asleep, creep out of the house in the middle of the night, and walk or catch a bus to the computer center. And he would just code until dawn, fueled by soda and this raw intellectual passion.
But this is also where we see the first real glimpse of the ruthless Gates, the guy who pushes the boundaries.
And hack.
The hack.
Exactly. Gates and Allen pretty quickly realized that just finding bugs wasn't enough. They wanted control. They dug into the operating system manuals for the PDP-10 and found a security flaw, a loophole that allowed them to log in with administrator rights.
Can you explain that for us, non-hack? What does administrator rights actually get?
It gets you the keys to the entire kingdom. It means you can see everyone else's files, you can delete things, you can alter the system logs to erase your tracks, and crucially for them, you can give yourself unlimited free computer time without being billed for it.
So they went from being helpful bug finders to actively exploiting the system for personal gain.
That's the leap they made. And, of course, they got caught.
Oh.
The company realized that someone was tampering with the billing file. The numbers weren't adding up. They traced it back to the Lakeside kids and their admin account. They were banned from using the computer for the entire summer.
Oh.
But it shows that mindset was there from the very beginning, that willingness to push the boundaries of any system, literally in this case, to get what he wanted.
Now, I want to talk about their first legitimate business ventures, because it's incredible that these kids started making actual money before they could even legally drive.
They formed the Lakeside Programming Group as a formal entity, and they got a real gig, a contract, writing a payroll program in the COBOL language for a company called Information Sciences, Inc.
And there's the detail in the source material about the credit they earned that I found absolutely hilarious.
Right. So instead of cash, they negotiated for free computer time as their payment. But when Gates, years later, went back and looked at the paperwork, he realized the math was just terrible.
How bad was it?
They had burned through about $25,000 worth of mainframe computer time to earn what amounted to $5,000 worth of credit.
That's a terrible return on investment. Was he just a bad businessman back then?
I don't think so. I think it was just a different kind of calculation going on in his head. He wasn't trying to maximize profit at that point. He was trying to maximize learning. He was basically getting a $25,000 education in computer science and business for free on someone else's dime.
That's a great way to look at it. They were learning by doing with zero risk.
Exactly.
But then tragedy strike. And this part of the transcript really stood out to me because we don't often hear about the emotional side of young Bill Gates. We hear all about Paul Allen, but who was Kent Evans?
Kent Evans was Bill's best friend at Lakeside. In a lot of ways, he was the alpha of their little program. He was the one who carried a briefcase to school. He was reading Fortune magazine when other kids were reading comics. He was politically active.
So he was the business mind to Gates's technical mind.
In a way, yes. He and Bill planned to conquer the world together. They had mapped out their entire future. They were going to be CEOs. They were going to have a massive impact. Kent was his intellectual equal and his partner in ambition.
They were working on a really big project together for the school, right? A class scheduling software.
A massive, complex project. The school had a crisis because a teacher who handled the manual scheduling had died in a plane crash, and the whole system was in total chaos. So the school administration tasked Gates and Evans with building a computer program from scratch to sort out the class schedule for the entire school. Hundreds of students, dozens of teachers.
And then, May 29th, 1972.
Memorial Day week, Kent Evans went on a mountaineering trip with the school. On the way down the mountain, he slipped on a snowy slope. He fell 600 feet, killed.
That must have just shattered Gates. He's, 16 or 17 years old at this point?
He was absolutely devastated. The documentary sources quote him as saying it was one of the saddest things that ever happened. He didn't just lose a friend. He lost his intellectual partner. He lost the person.
How did he cope with that?
Well, and this is so telling about his personality. He didn't stop. He didn't retreat.
He worked.
He worked with a frantic, almost scary intensity. He was overwhelmed with grief, but he also had this project that had to be finished. So he pulled in Paul Allen to help him finish that scheduling program. And that tragedy is what really cemented the Gates-Allen partnership that would go on Microsoft.
It's a haunting origin for his famous work ethic. It's not just ambition, it's grief being channeled directly into code.
Precise. He was working to fill the immense void left by his dead friend. And he didn't just finish the job. He built this incredibly elegant matrix for the scheduling that was so good, so optimized, that he and Evans had originally planned to sell it to other schools.
But he didn't.
After Kent died, he just finished it for Lakeside. And in a classic bit of teenage mischievousness, he programmed a little backdoor into it.
What for?
He programmed it to place himself in classes that were disproportionately filled with the girls.
Of course he did. Even in grief, he's still hacking the system.
Always.
So let's move to part 3, the Harvard pivot. Gates graduates from Lakeside. He scores a 1590 on his SATs, which is near perfect, and he goes to Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
And the transcript says he applied thinking he'd go into law or business.
Right. He was still sort of following that path his parents had envisioned, but once he got there, he enrolled in the most difficult math and engineering courses he could find. He was still searching for his path, and frankly, he was not a model.
What do you mean?
He was famous on campus for playing these high-stakes poker games all night, winning a lot of money off graduate students, and then sleeping through the classes he was actually signed up for.
But he was still learning.
Oh, yeah. He would skip his own classes just to go sit in on other more advanced lectures that he wasn't signed up for just because he found them more interesting.
That's such a flex. I'm too smart for the class I'm paying for. Let me go audit this graduate-level physics lecture just for fun.
It's that restless intellect again. He was constantly looking for the ceiling of his own intelligence, and he just wasn't finding it in the standard curriculum.
There's that great detail from his memoir, Source Code, about a hike he took around this time in 1971.
The mental coding story, yeah. It's incredible.
Tell us about it.
He was on this grueling hike, physically exhausted, miserable, trudging along. And to pass the time and distract himself from the physical pain, he started writing a complex computer program in his head.
Not just thinking about concepts, right?
No, he was visualizing the actual lines of code,
Yeah.
the syntax, the logic structures, the variable names. He was debugging it mentally, running through the... He said later it was the most elegant written, and he did it all while walking through the woods without a keyboard.
That is like that scene in The Queen's Gambit where she sees the chess pieces moving on the ceiling, but for soft.
It just shows a mental capacity, that is. Well, it's just different. Most people cannot hold that much abstract structure working memory.
But the real world-changing turning point comes in December 1974, the Altair moment.
This is the big bang of the personal computer era. Paul Allen, who had moved to Boston and was working at Honeywell just to be near Gates, sees a magazine cover. It's the January 1975 issue of Popular Electronics.
And on the cover is the Altair 8800.
A picture of this machine. And Paul Allen just understands.
Now, for you listeners, describe the Altair. This is not a MacBook Air.
Oh, far, far from it. It was a metal box. It had no screen, no keyboard, no mouse, just a row of red switches and blinking red lights on the front panel. It came as a kit. You had to actually solder it together yourself.
So it was for hardcore hobby.
Exact. But, and this is the key, it had the new Intel 8080 microprocessor chip side. It was a real programmable computer for under $400. Paul Allen buys the magazine, runs to Gates's dorm room, and basically says, "This is it. The revolution is happening, and it's happening without us."
So what does Bill do? He picks up the phone? He calls the company, me, in Albuquerque, New Mexico,
Yeah.
and he lies to them.
Let's call it a strategic bluff, a very bold one. He gets Ed Roberts, the president of Mintz, on the phone, and he tells him, "We have a basic interpreter written and ready to run on your machine."
Okay, let's pause there. What exactly is a basic interpreter? Why was that so important?
Okay, so the Altair computer on its own only understands binary, ones and zeros, which you'd have to toggle in using this. It's incredibly humans, obviously, speak English. Basic is a programming language that bridges that gap.
It's a translator.
It's a translator. It allows a human to type a command like print 2 + 2, and the computer understands what to do.
Yeah.
Without an interpreter, the Altair was just a box of blinking lights. It was useless to 99%.
So Gates tells Emites, we have this essential piece of translator software ready to go. Do they actually have it?
They absolutely did not. They hadn't written a single line of code. They didn't have the software. They didn't even have the machine to test it on.
So they were selling pure vaporware.
They were selling a promise, and Ed Roberts, the guy from Menites, bought it. He said, "Okay, lots of people are calling me. The first person to walk through my door and show me working software gets the contract."
And just like that, the clock starts ticking.
It was an all-out sprint. They basically lived in the Harvard computer lab day and night for 8. They stopped going to class, they stopped sleeping, they stopped showering. Paul Allen had to write a program to simulate the Altair's 8080 chip on the Harvard mainframe because they didn't have the actual device.
So they were writing code for a computer they'd never even touched.
Exact. Gates wrote the core interpreter code using a pencil and a yellow legal pad, and then they'd type it in.
And then the moment of truth, Paul Allen gets on a plane and flies to New Mexico to do the demo.
And he's on the plane, and he suddenly has this terrifying realization, a fatal error. They had written the software, the basic interpreter itself, but they had forgotten to write the bootloader.
The bootloader, what is that?
Think of it like the starter motor in a car. The software is the engine, but the bootloader is the tiny essential spark that turns the engine on. Without it, the computer doesn't know how to read the paper tape that holds the main software. It would just sit there, dead.
So he's on the plane.
And he has to write the bootloader code on a piece of paper during the flight from memory.
Yeah.
And it has to be written in raw machine code, basically ones and zeros, which is incredibly difficult. If he makes one single mistake, one typo, the entire thing will fail.
The pressure must have been immense. He walks into Mate. He loads the paper tape into the machine. The room is silent.
It's incredibly tense. Nobody at MRIs had ever seen this machine actually run a piece of complex software before. It had only ever blinked its light. Paul Allen flips the switches to enter the bootloader code he wrote on the plane. The lights blink. The machine starts reading the tape, and then it stops. The teletype asks for a command. He types print 2 + 2. He hits enter. The teletype chatters to life and prints out one character for It worked. That was the moment. That was the birth of the software industry. If that bootloader had a bug, if their simulation of the chip had been even slightly wrong, Ed Roberts would have just kicked him out of the office. And we might not be talking about Microsoft.
It's an incredible story. They named the company Microsoft with a hyphen at first.
And Gates makes the fateful decision to drop out of Harvard for good. He moves to Albuquerque to set up shop with Paul.
But almost immediately, he shows his true colors when it comes to business philosophy. We have to talk about the piracy law.
This is such a crucial moment for understanding Gates's world. In 1975, the epicenter of the tech world was the Homebrew Computer Club in California. These were the hobbyists, the hippies, the radicals.
Wozniak was there.
Absolutely. And their entire culture, their ethos was information wants to be free. Share the code. Help your neighbor build their machine. It was very communal.
So they were just copying Gates's basic software on paper tapes and passing it around for free?
Exactly. And from Gates's perspective, they were stealing. He went nuclear. He wrote this open letter to hobbyists and published it in all the newsletters.
And what did it say?
He basically called them thieves. He argued very forcefully that developers deserve to be paid for their time and their intellect. He wrote, and this is a key quote, "Who can afford to do professional work for nothing? What hobbyist can put 3-man years into programming, finding all bugs, documenting his product, and distributing?"
That seems completely obvious to us now. Of course, we pay for apps, we pay for software. But back then, that was a radical and very unpopular stance to take.
He was vilified for it. People in the hobbyist community hated him. They saw him as this greedy corporate interloper. But he was establishing the fundamental business model of the software. You're buying a license to use the code. You don't own the code itself, and you certainly can't copy it for all your friends. Turns software from a hobby.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the biggest deal of his part 4, the IBM.
The deal of the century. It's 1980. IBM is the giant. They are big blue. They dominate mainframe computing. And they decide, belatedly, that they need to get into this new personal computer market because Apple is starting to eat their lunch.
Now, the myth is that IBM just found this tiny company, Microsoft, because they're the best. But the source material points out a little bit of Nepotism, or at least some very fortunate networking.
It was a classic who-you-know situation. Mary Gates, Bill's very well-connected mother, served on the board of the National United Way charity.
And who else was on that board?
The CEO of IBM, John Opel, she mentioned to him that her son's little company was working with ComputerLink. She basically said, you should talk to Bill. That introduction is what got them in the room. It wasn't because they were the obvious choice.
Okay, so he gets the meeting.
Yeah.
IBM needs an operating system for their new PC. But Microsoft doesn't have one, right? They just make languages like BASIC.
Correct. They're a software language company.
Yeah.
But Gates knew IBM needed an OS more than anything, and he knew he didn't have the time or the resources to build one from scratch.
So he goes shopping.
He goes shopping. He finds a small company right there in Seattle called Seattle Computer Products, run by a guy named Tim Patterson. And they had built an OS called
QDOS. What does that stand for?
Quick and Dirty Operating System.
Quick and dirty. That really inspires confidence, doesn't it?
It was basically a clone of another popular system called CP/M, but the point is, it worked on the new 16-bit Intel chips that IBM was, so Gates goes to them.
And he buys it. How much did he pay?
He paid $50,000.
Wait, I should stop you again. $50,000
Yeah.
total for the full rights to the piece of software that would become the backbone of the entire PC industry.
$50,000 one-time payment. The crucial part is that the guy at Seattle Computer Products had no idea that IBM was the end customer. He thought he was just selling it to this small company, Microsoft.
Wow. Gates rebrands it as MS-DOS, and then he goes back to IBM.
He goes back to IBM and he licensed. But here is the absolute masterstroke of business genius. And this is the point where you, the listener, really need to pay attention because this decision made billions.
He didn't just sell it to IBM.
No. IBM, being a big old-fashioned company, wanted to buy it outright. They wanted to own the code. And Gates said no. He proposed a licensing deal instead.
What were the terms?
It was a flat fee. But the key provision was that Microsoft retained ownership of the code and, critically, kept the rights to license the software to other computer manufacturers.
Why on earth did IBM agree to that? That seems completely insane in hindsight.
It was pure corporate arrogance. IBM was a hardware company. They thought the money was in the metal, the box, the keyboard, the monitor. They thought of the software as just this trivial utility. Their attitude was, who cares about the code? It just makes the box go. We sell the boxes.
They didn't realize the software was where the real value.
They didn't see that the software would become the standard. So when the IBM clones started flooding the market, companies like Compaq, Dell, P, they all reverse engineered the IBM hardware, but they couldn't just copy the operating system.
They had to buy it.
And Bill Gates was standing there at the door saying, hi, I can sell you the exact same OS that IBM used. Microsoft got a royalty, a payment on every single PC sold, no matter who made it. IBM built the market, and Bill Gates got to tax the entire industry.
Unbelievable. Yeah. They commoditized the hardware and created a monopoly on the software.
Precisely. It was the exact moment the value in the technology industry shifted from atoms to bits, and he was the one who saw it coming.
But the world was changing again. And this brings us into part 5. The GUI wars, the graphical user interface.
The mouse, the windows, the icon, the little trash can, everything we think of as a modern computer.
And the story usually goes that Steve Jobs and Bill Gates both visited the legendary Xerox PR lab and saw the future.
Right. Xerox PR was this incredible research lab in Palo Alto. They basically invented the modern personal computer, the mouse, the graphical interface, Ethernet networking, laser printing. They invented all of it. The Xerox executives were copier guys. They didn't know what to do with any of it.
So Steve Jobs goes in, sees it, and has this epiphany that leads to the Macintosh. Then Gates sees it and creates Windows. And Jobs famously accused Gates of just stealing the idea from Apple.
It was an incredibly tense and complicated relationship. Jobs went absolutely ballistic when he saw the first version of Windows. He screamed at Gates, "You're ripping us off. I trusted you."
And what was Gates' defense? There's that famous quote.
It's one of the all-time great lines in tech history. Gates apparently just looked at him calmly and said, "Well, Steve, I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set and found out that you had already..."
I stole the stolen goods.
It's a fantastic line. But the reality, which is often overlooked, is that Microsoft was actually a huge and very important developer for the Macintosh at first. They made the first versions of Microsoft Word and, more importantly, Excel for the Mac.
So they were frenemies.
Total frenemies. And this gave Microsoft a huge advantage. They were essentially getting paid by Apple to learn how to build a graphical operating system. They were studying the Mac's strengths and its weaknesses from the inside while secretly working on their own version.
But those early versions of Windows,
Yeah.
they were not good, were they?
Oh, they were terrible. Windows 1.0, which came out in 1985, was a complete flop. Windows 2.0 in 1987 was barely any better. They were glitchy, they crashed all the time, they were ugly. Apple's Macintosh was light years ahead in terms of quality and user experience.
And this is where Steve Ballmer really enters the story in a big way.
Gates' old friend from Harvard. He had joined years earlier as the first business. He had no coding experience, but he was the enforcer. The source describes this relentless pressure he and Gates put on the developer.
The transcript also mentions Gates' management style here, micromanaging the smallest detail and being incredibly harsh.
It supposedly demoralized that Gates would do these code reviews and just tear people's work apart. He'd say things like, "This is the stupidest piece of code I've ever read." He was absolutely brutal. But through sheer force of will, they eventually got it right.
Windows 3.0.
Windows 3.0 in 1990. That was the turning point. It finally worked. It was stable enough. It looked a lot like a Mac, but critically, it ran on cheap, generic PC hardware. You didn't have to buy Apple's expensive proprietary box.
And then they came up with the killer application strategy. Office, bundling Word, Excel, and PowerPoint together.
That was the death blow to the company. Before Microsoft Office, you bought your word processor from WordPerfect and your spreadsheet from Lotus 123. They were the dominant players.
And Gates destroyed them.
He destroyed them. He bundled his own good enough apps with Windows at a price that was impossible to beat. Excel killed Lotus. Word killed WordPerfect. By the early 90s, if you bought a PC for work, you were running Windows and you were running Office. Microsoft owned the desktop.
Which brings us to the absolute peak of his power and also to the darkness. Part 6, the monopolist and the antitrust. By the mid-90s, Gates is no longer the scrappy underdog. He is the empire.
And the culture inside Microsoft reflected that new reality. It was a culture defined by fear and paranoia. The source details this employee review system they used called stack ranking.
Rank and yank.
That's the nickname for it. Every 6 months, every manager had to grade their employees on a curve. A certain percentage had to be rated excellent, a certain percentage average, and the bottom 5 or 10% had to be rated poor.
And if you were at the bottom?
You were usually fired. It created this incredibly cutthroat internal environment where people were competing fiercely with their own, not just with others.
And Gates drove this paranoia from the very top, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He famously told the Wall Street Journal in an interview, "You always have to be thinking about who is coming to get." His greatest fear was being the next great company that gets lazy and is replaced.
And in 1995, who was to get him? A company called Netscape.
And the internet. Gates, by his own admission, initially missed the internet. He thought it was a fad, not central to the future of computing. But in 1995, he pivoted hard. He wrote this famous internal memo called the Internet Tidal Wave.
But Netscape Navigator was the dominant web browser at the time. Everyone was using it. So how did Microsoft kill it?
He used his Windows monopoly as a weapon. He created Internet Explorer, and then he bundled it with every single copy of Windows for free. Free. Netscape was trying to sell their software for roughly $40 a copy. Microsoft not only gave theirs away, they integrated it so deeply into Windows that it was impossible to uninstall. You simply cannot compete with a rival product that is both free and already installed on 90% of the world.
And that specific tactic is what finally triggered the Department of Justice.
That was the smoking gun. It was a clear-cut case of using your monopoly power in one market operator to kill competition in an emerging market web browser. The government sued them for abuse of monopoly power and limiting consumer choice.
And the trial began in 1998. This brings us right back to our intro, with the government trying to break them up.
It does.
And I remember the video footage of his deposition. It's in the documentary. He looks awful. Not just tired, but arrogant and evasive.
It was a public relations disaster. Here is supposed to be the smartest man in the world, and he's on camera playing dumb. The government prosecutor would ask him about a specific email he sent about crushing, and Gates would just rock back and forth in his chair, look at the ceiling, and say things like, "I don't recall what I meant by that," or quibbling over the definition of words like market or compete.
It just completely shattered his public image. He wasn't the boy genius from Harvard anymore. He was this evasive, arrogant tycoon.
Absolutely. And even though they ultimately avoided the breakup, a new presidential administration came in, a new judge took over, and they reached a settlement in 2002. The damage was done. Microsoft was forced to open up its Windows APIs to third-party developers. They were put on a...
And here's the big question that the expert in the documentary source posed. Did this massive, multi-year legal battle distract them just enough to let the next generation of tech companies win?
I think the answer is unequivocally yes, which leads us directly into part 7.
Yeah.
The lost decade.
The 2000s. From roughly 2000 to 2010, on paper, Microsoft is making money hand over fist from Windows and Office, but culturally, They are dead in the water. They are a zombie company when it comes to real innovation.
They missed every single major technology of that decade, and they missed them all for the same reason. They were too focused on protecting the Windows and Office cash cows.
Okay, let's just list them. E-readers.
Microsoft had a prototype e-reader in 1990, a tablet device specifically for reading books, but the project was killed. And why? Because, according to an engineer on the project, Bill Gates didn't like it because the screen resolution didn't look as good as a Windows screen. He couldn't imagine a successful computing device that wasn't a version of a PC.
So Amazon released the Kindle years later and completely owned the market.
A market Microsoft could have created.
Okay, next, digital music.
The iPod came out in 2001. Apple made technology cool, simple, and elegant. Microsoft waited 5 years until 2006 to release their competitor, the
Brown Z.
It was bulky, the software was clunky, it was way too late to the party, and nobody wanted it. It came a punchline.
And then the big one, the one that really costs in the future, mobile.
This is the $400 billion mistake by some estimate. When the first iPhone launched in 2007, Steve Ballmer, who had taken over from Gates as CEO, literally laughed at it in a televised interview.
I remember that clip. It's painful to watch now.
He just mocks it. He says, it's $500, it doesn't have a keyboard, business customers will never buy a device like that.
Oof, that clip is aged like milk left out in the sun.
It shows just how deeply disconnected they were from where technology was headed. They were still pushing Windows Mobile, which was this awful, clunky interface with a tiny start menu you had to poke with a stylus. They didn't see the touch revolution coming at all.
And the Windows Phone didn't arrive until 2010.
Way too late. By then, Google's Android and Apple's iOS had completely locked up the market in a duopoly that exists to this day. Gates himself later admitted that losing the mobile phone operating system market to Google's Android was his single biggest management failure.
And finally, sir.
They had Bing, but Google became a verb. And Google's Chrome browser eventually overtook Internet Explorer. Microsoft went from owning 95% of the browser market to being the butt of the joke, the browser you only use once to download Chrome.
So Gates steps down as CEO in 2000. He stays on as chairman for a while, but his focus begins to shift dramatically. And this is the great pivot. Part 8, the second act, the philanthropy.
This transformation is just as remarkable as the creation of Microsoft itself. And again, like so many things in his life, it starts with his mother.
How so?
Before she died of breast cancer in 1994, Mary Gates urged him, pleaded to use his immense wealth and talent for something more than just business, give back. At her funeral, the pastor read a letter she had written to Bill and his wife, Melinda, and the central theme was the biblical phrase, for those to whom much is given, much.
And that stuck with him.
It seems to have been a major catalyst. He starts the foundation, which was originally the William H. Gates Foundation in 1994, and then in 2000, it merges with Melinda's philanthropic work to become the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
And he brings that same obsessive Dewey Decimal System energy to charity.
He absolutely does. This is the key insight. Most billionaires just write a big check to a hospital or a university and get their name on it. Gates didn't do that. He approached philanthropy like an engineering problem. He looked at the data. He asked, where can my dollar save the most human lives? What is the highest possible return on investment for humanity?
And the answer he found was vaccine.
Vaccines and sanitation. Things that aren't glamorous, but that the data showed were the root causes of death and disease for millions of children.
Oh.
So he brought systems thinking to global health. Take polio, for example.
Right.
It's not just about buying the vaccine. The hard part is the cold chain. How do you get a vaccine that needs to be kept refrigerated to a remote village in Nigeria that has no electricity?
Yeah.
Gates's foundation used satellite imagery to map villages that weren't on any official map. They used GPS to track the vaccination teams to make sure that they were actually going where they were supposed to. They ran it like a military logistics operation.
And the results, I mean, they're undeniable, aren't they?
They are staggering. Polio was officially eradicated from Southeast Asia in 2014 and from the entire continent of Africa in 2020. That is a monumental achievement for humanity, and it simply would not have happened, or at least not as quickly, without the foundation's money and focus. You cannot argue with the millions of lives that have been saved.
But I do want to push back a little here, because it's not all sunshine. The source material brings up some criticism. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he spent billions on the response, which is great, but he also publicly defended patent rights for the vaccines.
Yes.
Which effectively blocked cheaper, generic versions from being made available to poor countries more quick. That sounds a lot like the old Bill Gates, protecting intellectual property over open access.
That is a very fair and very common critique of his. His argument was, and is, that you need to protect IP rights to incentivize the pharmaceutical companies to innovate in the first place, even during a global pandemic. It's the exact same logic as his 1975 open letter to hobbyists.
Developers must be paid.
Developers must be. It shows that his core business philosophy hasn't really changed, even if his goals have shifted from making money to saving lives.
And in the last few years, this image of Saint Bill the benevolent world saver, has cracked even further.
It has. The paradox is back with a vengeance.
Let's talk about the Jeffrey Epstein connection.
Right. The New York Times and other outlets reported that he met with Jeffrey Epstein multiple times, starting in 2011. This is well after Epstein's first conviction for sex crimes involving a minor. Gates has claimed the meetings were purely about fundraising for global health and says he regrets it, calling it a huge mistake. But it looks terrible. It raises the question, why was he in the room with that man at all?
Then there was the divorce from Melinda in 2021.
After 27 years of marriage. And it quickly became clear it wasn't an amicable split. There were revelations in the press of an affair he had with a Microsoft employee years prior. And now, Melinda is stepping down from the foundation. It revealed that behind this carefully curated public image of a world-saving partnership, there were still very real, very messy personal flaws and dynamics.
And then, to top it all off, the conspiracy theories, the microchips and the vaccine.
It's the ultimate bizarre irony, isn't it? The man who is spending billions of his own dollars to create and distribute life-saving vaccines is accused by millions of people on the internet of using those same vaccines to secretly implant microchips to track and control the population. He's become a villain to a whole new generation of people for completely different and, frankly, unhinged.
So we arrive at our outro. Bill Gates turned 70 in 2025.
He's an elder statesman now. He's released this memoir, Source Code. He's in a reflective phase, looking back at...
And it really is this profound duality. You have the man who ruthlessly crushed Netscape, who yelled at his employees until they cried, who built a monopoly so powerful the government tried to break it. And you have the man who's trying to wipe malaria off the face of the earth and build next-generation nuclear power plant to fight climate.
And the source material really emphasizes that these are not two different... It's the same brain, the same operating system. It's that same need for order, for scale, for optimization that he had as a kid with the Dewey Decimal.
Oh, so?
He optimized his business to make the maximum amount of money, and now he is optimizing his fortune to save the maximum number of lives. He treats a disease like malaria the same way he treated a competitor like Lotus 1 as a problem to be solved, a system to be dominated, a bug to be identified, isolated, and patched out of existence.
It raises a really tough question for us, and for you, the listener. Does the good that is being done by the Gates Foundation somehow justify or erase the ruthless tactics that were used to build the fortune that funds it?
And the bigger question, can you even be a billionaire saint? Or is that level of ruthlessness a prerequisite for accumulating the kind of power and resources needed to make that? If he had been a nicer, more collaborative guy in 1980, would he have the billions needed to eradicate pollution?
It's the ultimate question of means and end.
And of bugs.
Bugs? What do you mean?
Gates spent his entire life looking for bugs in computer code, logical mistake, flaws in this. But as we see with his controversial business practices, his messy personal life, and his complicated legacy, human operating systems are full of bugs that you can't just patch out with an update. They're flaws you just have to...
That is a deep thought to end on. Check your own operating systems, everyone. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
It's been fascinating to talk through.
See you next time.